This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy and TNC chapters throughout the western United States. Guided by science and grounded by decades of collaborative partnerships, the Nature Conservancy has a long-standing legacy of achieving lasting results to create a world where nature and people thrive. During the last week of every month throughout 2025, Mountain Prairie will be delving into conversations with a wide range of the Nature Conservancy's leaders, partners, collaborators, and stakeholders, highlighting the myriad of conservation challenges, opportunities, and solutions here in the American West and beyond. To learn more about the Nature Conservancy's impactful work in the West and around the world, visit www.nature.org. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Brad Johnson. Brad is the Senior Regenerative Agriculture Advisor for the Nature Conservancy, where he helps farmers across Idaho and beyond explore new ways of working the land that build healthier soils, stronger operations, and more resilient communities. Brad's path into this work is deeply personal. He grew up on a multi-generational farm in northern Idaho, where as a teenager he saw firsthand how no-till practices could dramatically reduce erosion on the steep, fertile hills of his family's farm. That early aha moment set him on a winding path through farming, ranching, research, and even a stint in agricultural sales, before eventually joining TNC in 2019. In this conversation, Brad and I dig into the practical realities of regenerative agriculture, what it looks like on the ground, why it's both promising and challenging to scale, and how trust and relationships are every bit as important as science and technology. He shares stories from TNC's demonstration farms, where producers are experimenting with new biological practices that reduce resilience on fungicides and pesticides, and from high school programs where the next generation of Idaho farmers are already putting regenerative methods into practice. Brad's perspective is grounded in lived experience and a genuine respect for the farmers he works with. Whether you're deep in the ag world or simply curious about how food systems can adapt to a changing climate, this episode offers a clear, hopeful look at what's possible when conservation and agriculture work hand in hand. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. We kind of scrambled to get this on the calendar at the last minute, and I just really appreciate it. And I've enjoyed learning about your work at TNC, obviously, but even more, I'm intrigued by you and your family's history in Idaho, because if my internet stalking is correct, your family's been in Idaho for coming up on 100 years, I guess. And so could you just give me a little bit of a history lesson about your family's history in Idaho?
Yeah, of course. And I'm honored to be on the podcast. Thank you for the super quick invitation yesterday.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So, I grew up, my grandfather started farming up in northern Idaho. If you're familiar with Idaho, it's about halfway between Moscow, Idaho and Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, up on the Coeur d'Alene Indian Reservation. Grandpa started farming there. Then my dad took over, bought some more land. And then he actually quit farming in 1991, the year I graduated from high school, and moved on down to Boise to be the executive director for the Idaho Grain Producers Association. But in his farming career, we grew a lot of Kentucky bluegrass seed. It was a big crop up in that area. It goes into lawns and golf courses and all that. Interesting crop. We'd grow it on the same field for 10 years or so, somewhere around there. And then we'd try to plow it out. And that was always a nightmare. We'd flip it over with the moldboard plow, and it would take, 6, 7, maybe sometimes 10 tillage passes to break down that sod to a manageable size that we could plant another crop. So in the mid 80s, he got a NRCS grant, or not a grant, but the EQIP program is what it was, I think.
Yeah.
So he got some funding and bought a no-till drill just for this purpose of taking out this bluegrass sod. That way we could just kill the bluegrass and plant either spring wheat, or we found oats worked the best, actually. So we started doing that with a no-till drill just so we didn't have that huge mess of sod in the next growing season. And I was probably 14, 15 at the time. And I remember this aha moment for me, because usually in harvest, we're going around ditches, because for your listeners that aren't familiar with that country, it's called the Palouse. It's a farming region that takes in northern Idaho, eastern Washington, and a little bit of Oregon. Super fertile soils, very, very productive, but it's all on steep hillsides to the point where we had modified combines that self-leveled themselves. Anyway, so erosion was a huge issue up there, and still is to this day, but a lot less. Anyway, so as that 14-year-old kid, I just noticed all of a sudden that there was no ditches left. When we were harvesting before, we'd have to go up and down these gullies because they were too deep to go through with the combine. And all of a sudden, when we started no-tilling, those were gone. It was amazing to me, and it was a huge eye-opener to me that this is how we should be farming to save our soil. Some other guys down in like the Colfax, Washington area, they started no-tilling about the same time because they were tired of all the dirt washing down over the roads, and the highway department would have to come and take literally snowplows and push that dirt back off the road into the field. It was just a huge problem. And all of a sudden, no-till, to me, was the answer. And so I can't really claim that we were a regenerative farm back then because we didn't really know what it was. We were just using no-till as our practice on the farm to plant our crops the next year.
For people who aren't familiar with what a no-till drill is, can you describe that and compared to the more traditional method?
Of course. So a no-till drill is it's a seeding tool that either uses a single disc operation or one shank that puts the seed directly into the ground without any tillage. So in a conventional system, you would plow the field or chisel plow the field to flip over that residue from the last year, flip the soil over, and prepare, in quotes, a seed bed for the next year that we could plant our crops into. So it was, if you're doing that up in that area where I grew up, it was one tillage pass in the fall and then 2 to 3 in the spring, and then you'd plant your crop, which, as you can imagine, left that soil bare and exposed to all of the elements, wind and water and everything. So a no-till drill just plants the crop directly into last year's crop residue without disturbing the soil.
So when you guys started doing that, I mean, when you had that kind of aha moment, did you guys really kind of change your operation drastically over the next few years, or was it more of a slow change, or how did that affect your family's operation going forward?
Back then, it was kind of a slow change, I guess. We would no-till the bluegrass that we were tearing out. And then my father, coming out of lentils, which there's zero residue after a lentil crop, he would no-till that, but he was still a little skeptical on no-tilling wheat into wheat stubble back then. It was just, everybody thought you couldn't do it. The stubble would shade the new crop too much and it wouldn't grow. We did some of it, but not a lot. So it was kind of a slow transition for Dad. But the interesting thing in order to help pay for that drill, even beyond the equip payments, we still needed some extra income to pay for it. So Dad and a partner that he took on, they ran around the Palouse, around Moscow, Idaho, and Potlatch and other areas, no-tilling for other farms that were curious about it. And just a funny story I'll throw in here. One of the neighbors, I always kind of thought that he questioned Dad whether no-till was the proper thing to do and thought it was kind of crazy. And when we quit farming and had the auction, guess who bought that no-till drill?
That's the ultimate advertisement there.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's amazing. So, can you tell me more about how it was, how it was thought about in the community? Because I would imagine there was a bunch of skepticism initially, but how did it what was that progression of people slowly buying in? I mean, I guess at the end of the day, it worked. The results spoke for themselves, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, we lost a little bit of yield, I guess, because of it, because we didn't know how, and there wasn't anybody really around us to ask questions. There was a few guys down in Colfax, but they were quite a ways away and we didn't know them all that well. So we did lose a little bit of yield in our transition time and our our learning period, if you will.
Yeah.
So the neighbors, I think they were kind of cautiously watching. But to this day now, there's still some that till up there, but there is a lot more no-till being performed in the Palouse, which is excellent because it's such an erosion-prone area.
Nowadays the word regenerative is used in a lot of different ways and seems to have, in some ways, a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. Was that word even thought of back then when you guys started doing that? And when did it kind of, this method that y'all were using and then that your neighbors started using and the community started using, when did that become kind of known mainstream as being regenerative, if it ever even did?
I don't know if it still is. No, back in the late 80s, early 90s, it was just no-till. And that was all we talked about. Soil health wasn't a thing yet. Regenerative ag wasn't a thing yet. And I don't think that really came into play until 2010 or maybe even later than that. And for me, I thought no-till was what you were supposed to do. And I had never heard this term soil health or regenerative ag until I started working for TNC almost. It was being talked about, but I wasn't super familiar with it.
Can you tell me a little bit about, so you were farming, your dad stopped, I guess you said, when you were in high school, and what was your kind of journey pre-TNC as a farmer?
So I went to college at the University of Idaho, and I needed to grow up a little bit, as most college kids do, and ended up moving to Twin Falls, Idaho, which is quite far south, into the irrigation area, potatoes and all that, which is a whole new thing for me. Went to work for a farmer there in Twin Falls, and lo and behold, he was a no-tiller, which is it's kind of fascinating to me that everywhere I go, I run into it at that time. So he was no-tilling grain directly into grain stubble, and then it was kind of more of a direct seed system, I guess you will. In his case, the farmer would harvest their potatoes in the fall and work it once to smooth the field back out, and then would direct seed grains into that in the spring. So it wasn't a total no-till system, but kind of a minimum till system, I guess. And so then did that for 7 years around Twin, and decided it was time to go back to college. I'd grown up finally. Finished my degree in plant and soil science at the University of Idaho. Met my wife there in college, and she grew up on a ranch in Salmon, Idaho.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful place. So after college, we decided we worked for a friend of mine up around Moscow for a year, and then we moved to Salmon to start ranching with her parents. Did that for a few years. Decided I don't really like cows that much. I'd much
Fair
rather
enough.
Plants can't kick you. So I went to work for the University of Idaho, actually, at a research ranch that they have up there called the Nancy Cummings Center. And it was I wasn't officially the farm manager, but I was the farmer in the area in that place. So we started playing with no-till alfalfa. We'd no-till in some other different plant species into alfalfa to try to get our feed position better. We played with sorghum Sudan grass, which is interesting in salmon. It's fairly high elevation, pretty cold temperatures, and we made sorghum Sudan work up there. So we did that for a few years, and then my wife, she's a marriage counselor.
Okay.
And she had the opportunity to move to Idaho Falls, where she could kind of manage the office down here and go to work down here. And I took a job as a fertilizer salesman at a large ag retailer in the area.
That's cool. And that's I really like that because it's so wide ranging, in just a relatively short amount of time, you're able to touch so many different areas of the business, which I imagine, at least in my life, like going forward, none of it makes any sense. And then when I look backwards, I'm like, oh, it all kind of lines up in a good way. And so when did TNC enter your brain?
Let's see. Well, I was trying to sell fertilizer and chemicals and all that, and I'm not a very good salesman. But the other part of it too is it just didn't make sense to me. We kept adding all these products to the land and spraying these fungicides and all that on these crops. And I'm like, why are we doing this? This crop doesn't need a fungicide, but I'm told to sell it, and I'm told that this crop needs it and I'm supposed to protect it for this farmer. And it wasn't making sense to me. But in my time at Salmon, I had gotten to know some people within TNC because I've done a huge amount of work on the Lemhi River up there. Beautiful place. They've protected it. They've done a ton of work, and it's, and anyway, I respected the Nature Conservancy for that. They knew how to work with the ranchers. They knew what they needed to do on the Lemhi. And there's a specific person that worked at TNC at the time that was just wonderful about making those relationships and making it work for both parties. So I always had it in the back of my head that this was a great group of people that are friends to agriculture. They're getting what they need. And I've always thought I'd like to work for them someday. And through that, I heard that they were hiring this position as they were building this agriculture program. And so I threw my name in the hat and ended up with a job in 2019.
My background, before I went all in on this crazy podcast, I was in the real estate business, selling these big ranches to the people. And I had a hard time with it because it was similar to you talking about the fertilizer, like trying to sell something that I was not fully passionate about, or maybe even, I didn't buy into at all. Actually, it was really, really tough. But then when I entered the conservation world as a conservation director, and when it came to raising money, I could sell the conservation products real well because I felt, I was bought in and I believed in it. It's kind of interesting how that works. So when you think about your job at TNC, I mean, I want to dig into all the different initiatives and the different things you're working on. But if you had to summarize kind of what are your goals, what's the mission of your work, how do you judge success? How would you describe your job at TNC?
I mean, we have our goals, our 2030 goals and all that we're pushing towards. But for me personally, it's just, if I could help, there's not even a percentage of growers out there, but the more farmers that I can help move down this, what I call biological farming road, that's probably what I'm driving to do. Because I think, to me, it's a better way of farming. They can be more profitable this way. So the more farmers I can reach out to and teach this new method, the happier I'll be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like with everybody I've had on the podcast from TNC, it really comes down to building these solid relationships with folks and coming in with this posture of, hey, I'm here to help. How can I help? And it seems like that's exactly what you're doing. So this is kind of a high level question, but I'm just thinking about you go up, you meet with a farming family that may be that's interested enough to invite you into their home to talk about this. What are some of the challenges that they face in switching over to a more regenerative practice? Because I would imagine, like we were talking about with kind of traditional farming, there is just this inertia of things have worked very well up to this point. Why should we change? So when you start meeting with somebody who's like, I'm interested in learning more, I might want to change, which is a big deal in the ag business. How does that conversation go?
It depends on the person too. First, we have to get through the fact that I do work for a conservation group, and sometimes that scares certain farmers. Yeah. But we get through that. I earn their trust. That's the key right there. But we kind of have to start it slow. Reducing your tillage and cover crops is kind of the entry drug, I guess, if you will. You start small, you start there, kind of get them started on the idea of, we've got to keep a living root in that soil to feed the biology that I'm in turn going to teach you how to put into your soil. So I think that's kind of that's the stepping stone. And the biggest hiccup for most growers that I talk to is eliminating fungicides and insecticides in their operation. Through time, we've been taught through research and all the manufacturers and all the agronomists out there, not all, but most of them, that your crop's going to die if we don't manage the fungi in the soil and the pathogens that you could get if you don't control them. So that's probably the biggest hang up I see is is getting rid of those fungicides in your crop rotation or your farm management plan, I guess, if you will.
And so maybe that brings us to some of the kind of experimental farms or the farms that TNC manages that really works on some of these technologies or different farming practices. And then I would imagine you can show farming families, kind of proof of if you do this, you do this. Can you talk a bit about those farms that you guys have?
Yeah. So we have three demonstration farms. One's on its way out in Twin Falls, but two main ones right now with Blake Matthews in Oakley, Idaho, just south of Burley, Idaho. So we have that one with Blake, and then another one in Aberdeen, Idaho with Lad Wallen. So I'll dive into Blake's a little bit. Blake started this journey, I think about 12 years ago. Every time they would apply Roundup to their sugar beets, they would stop growing for 2 weeks. And so he reached out to his field man agronomist and said, how do we fix this? Because I'm losing 2 weeks of growth that I need to maintain. So Jared Cook is his name, the agronomist. He started reading lots of books and learning about it. And that's kind of what the catalyst for them to do this was. They figured out if they added a little bit of biology after that application, then the plants just kept growing. And so it's taken off from there to the point now for 7 years, Blake hasn't done any fungicides or insecticides on his potatoes, sugar beets, corn, wheat, barley, everything. He does still spray some weeds and still uses a very, very reduced rate of fertilizer. So he's not organic, but he has cut out all those products that essentially he doesn't need on his farm. It's a pretty cool story. It was one that I heard about in what we call Leadership Idaho Agriculture here in Idaho. It's a leadership course that you can take in the wintertime that I went through, and that's how I met Blake and learned that he was doing all this cool stuff on his farm, and reached out to him and just said, hey, could we partner with you to bring farmers in, tour your farm, see what you're doing, and try to use you as our living classroom to teach other farmers how to do this?
It's pretty funny because I feel like I'm like the dumbest guy in the world half the time. And so I'm going to ask dumb questions, but you said add some biology to the soil, I think. So how does it go from you take off spraying to all of a sudden you don't need to spray anymore? Like what do you do to what is Blake doing to the land that is allowing him to just remove those fungicides and everything works okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So we call it competitive exclusion. So in a conventional system, like we'll spray a fungicide on, say, potatoes 2 to 3, maybe 4 times during the season. And what that's doing is it's killing off that bad fungi that we don't want, the pathogen, but it's also killing everything off. So all fungi and all that in the soil. So with this competitive exclusion idea is we add all of these biological stimulants and other biological products into the soil, and it's just the good guys are out competing the bad guys. So
okay,
I think of it in this term sometimes. Say you're wanting to go eat at a restaurant. You pull up to one of the chain restaurants or whatever, wherever you're at, and there's a line outside. You're like, well, nope, not going to go to that one. I'm going to go to this restaurant over here that doesn't have a line so I can get in and eat. It's kind of the same thing with pathogens. They'll pull up to this plant, and if there's a whole host of other microbes out there, they're not that interested. They'll go on to the plant that's not protected by all these other good bacteria and fungi.
Yeah, it's almost like it fills a vacuum. So like when the Roundup or whatever chemical, the fungicide is going on there, it kills everything. Then there's a vacuum and the bad stuff can go in, almost like invasive weeds.
Yeah. They will enter the system faster than the good guys.
And then how often, can you tell me specifically about, is it something that you spray on with a tractor, or do you mix it into the soil? Like what exactly are you putting in the soil?
Some of it we're putting in, we call it in furrow. So when you're like for potatoes, for instance, you'll put a band of fertilizer, or in our case, we put this band of biology right underneath the potato seed piece, so that as soon as that plant's growing, it hits that and it has that benefit. So that's one method. We use that one. And then also during the season, we will we'll pull what we call sap samples, which is part of these new technologies that I mentioned earlier. It's a test that we can take where we take the old leaf and the new leaf of a plant and compare those two and the nutrients that are in those two leaves. And it kind of gives us a picture of what nutrition the plant has and where it's at in the plant. So with that being said, we'll take those tests. That'll tell us if we need some micronutrients or some macronutrients, but we also throw biology in that mix, and we'll fly that on or spray it on we'll either apply it with an airplane or a ground rig. So spray it on with the tractor or fly it on with an airplane. So we're doing that throughout the growing season. Oh man, every couple of weeks, I guess.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Just trying to keep that biology in the soil alive and well.
Over time, like maybe not on Blake's farm, but just in general, when you read about this type of thing, does after 10 years of doing that, or after some period of time, does it become more self-sustaining? Like over time, do you have to apply less and less of that? Or is it the kind of thing that you always are going to need to do it the same amount every year?
No, it's diminishing. As you build it up to a certain level and you keep a living root in that soil to feed that biology that you're building, you can reduce the amount that you're adding to it. It just kind of depends on your crop rotation and what you're needing out of your soil, I guess.
That's super interesting.
Yeah. The funny part on Blake's, a few years ago, they noticed that they were short on nitrogen all of a sudden. And it was because that microbial community in the soil had built up so much that it was actually taking some of the nitrogen out. So we had to add a little bit more into it.
It's crazy.
Yeah. His soils are amazing now. Like we went out into a corn field and it was corn on corn. So it had been corn 2 years, probably 270 bushel corn. And because of the biology that he'd put on that, all of that corn residue from the prior year was gone. What was there was all moldy and eaten up, but it's just fascinating to see what he's done to his farm and how it's working for him.
Yeah, it's listening to you describe it. Obviously you're an expert at building long-term relationships and a people person, but you're also playing a role of like a soil biologist at the same time. You're talking about some pretty hardcore science stuff that is your daily life. Do you enjoy that part of it? It seems like it.
I do. And we have to use that expert term loosely. Jared Cook is a guy that is Blake's agronomist, and basically everything I know I've learned through Jared. He's probably one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and he's the one that figured all this out for Blake.
So you mentioned Blake's. What is the other demonstration for him?
So Lad Wallen is our other one, and he's in Aberdeen, Idaho. So it's if you're familiar with Idaho, there's the American Falls Reservoir. He's just to the west of that. They grow a lot of potatoes and a lot of wheat in that area, and it's sometimes on a 3 to 4 year rotation, but wheat, alfalfa, and potatoes, and some sugar beets. There's some sugar beets in that area too. Lad's a young person. He's mid-30s, I would say. We met here 4 years ago, and he was interested in doing some of this and hadn't done much of it on his farm. So we partnered with him kind of the same way we have with Blake. Blake's is different because we're learning from him, and Lad was just trying to learn how to do this. So 2 different styles of demonstration farms, I guess, where we're kind of learning with Lad and helping him mitigate his risk as he goes down this road. He's doing some cool stuff too, but he and his wife decided on the farm that they needed a way to increase their income and kind of get away from commodity prices, if you will. So they started making their own potato chips. So they have their own potato chip brand called Roots Idaho Chips, and I can't remember how many acres of his own farm, but it's a portion of his potato production goes straight into their potato chip factory, if you will. And it's a pretty cool little deal for he and his family, making a little bit more money on it, hopefully, and just found their own little niche market.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, so he's doing the same kind of practices as Blake, trying to get it figured out, using lots of compost and what we call compost extract, where you'll take old dairy manure, compost that, and then we run that through a high pressure water screen and turn that dry compost into liquid. And then that's what he's using on that in-furrow process that I was talking about at Blake's.
I would imagine it's just so inspiring getting to spend time around folks that are so innovative and thinking. And so, they're thinking from a science perspective, they're thinking from an entrepreneurship perspective, from a conservation perspective. That's one of the things I've always just been amazed with, particularly with farmers, is how innovative and entrepreneurial they are in so many different sectors. They're dealing with supply chains and buyers, and then they're dealing with equipment, and they're dealing with soil. And do any people that, not necessarily demonstration farm families, but families that you've worked with over your career at TNC, are there any success stories that come to mind, people that you've been able to work with, maybe provide them with some support or some information, and then they've been able to make some changes that have helped their family? Do any particular success stories come to mind?
A farm that we just started working with in another area of Idaho up against the Teton Mountains. And it's brand new, so I guess I could kind of call it a success story because their first growing season was a success, but they wanted to get into, so to back up a little bit, TNC's not partnered, but we're part of a Climate Smart grant through the University of Idaho. Well, I should say we were. Then it got taken away this spring, and hopefully we get that back. But anyway,
my wife works for an organization that's in the same boat.
Okay,
so I think y'all get it back.
Yeah, I hope we do. But anyway, this farm wanted to start no-tilling because they're in a high erosion area also. So because of this grant, they haven't gotten paid, but hopefully they will. They started no-till on the whole farm, 3,700 acres. And to me, that's a success story because now they're stepping out and trying new things. This was their first growing season where they went full no-till, and their yields were actually a little bit better than what they expected. So to me, that's a success story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think just like we were talking about the momentum of multi-generational farmers have been doing it a certain way, and to get somebody to switch, that's a huge win. And then when the results are great like that. Where was that farm exactly?
Up in Ashton, Idaho.
Oh man. I used to live in Wyoming and Jackson on the other side, but I was always doing a lot of work over there in Teton Valley, Idaho. I love that area. It's
so me too.
That was the first time I ever saw a potato farm.
All right. Well, you got to come out to Idaho and we'll go tour around.
There's also in Driggs, there was a drive-in movie theater called the Spud, and it was with a big potato out there.
Yeah, it blew over a couple of years ago.
Did it really?
Yeah, I can't remember. I want to say I saw a news release that they're going to rebuild it, but I might be wrong about that. But yeah, sadly, the Spud blew over.
I know you guys have a partnership with the high school, and you've been doing some work kind of right on the ground floor of folks getting into ag. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so that it's brand new. This was the first summer of it. So back to Jared Cook, he brought this to my attention because he's on their agriculture advisory board. But so Minico High School is, if not the largest, one of the largest schools in Idaho, but a fairly big school in Idaho. But they do have the largest FFA program in the state. I think last I heard, I'm going to be wrong on these numbers, but it's around 120 to 150 kids that are active in FFA, which is pretty big for Idaho. Anyway, they wrote a grant a few years ago and were awarded that grant and built a new building, a new agriculture shop with welding and animal science, plant science, the whole 9 yards. Beautiful, beautiful facility that they just opened up for this school year. But along with that, they were donated a 7-acre field right next to the high school. And then the local irrigation business donated a pivot to them so they could irrigate it with a circle pivot. Anyway, Jared came to me and said, would TNC be willing to sponsor this? And then we can teach these high school kids regenerative practices. And so I was like, heck yeah, we'll do that in a heartbeat. Raise the money. We're paying them we're not paying them, but we sponsor that farm, and then they are learning how to do the Jared Cook method, I call it, with full biology and no fungicides and all that good stuff. So they haven't harvested those potatoes yet. We're kind of waiting to see how that lands, but it's a really cool program. There's kids are all involved. I think this summer there was 3 to 4 kids that managed that farm all summer long. Kind of the cool thing that's coming out of that, from what I hear, is the fathers of those kids are coming to it and like looking at it saying, how are you growing these potatoes without the fungicides? Like, there's no fungi, there's no pathogen here. They look beautiful. So it's having an impact already, and we're only into year 1.
One of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like with regenerative ag practices, there really is no one size fits all. There are these overarching principles, but then kind of the magic of it is that you need to kind of customize your approach for each individual farm. And so when you're in your job, trying to help a lot of people convert over to this, what do you see as the challenges, either with TNC's work or just in regenerative ag as a whole? What are the challenges to scaling this, to making it easy for lots and lots of people to switch over? Because in a way, it's kind of the exact opposite of scalable, because it's so customized for each farm. But how do you think about really, allowing this to catch on with tons of people at scale, if that question makes any sense?
Yeah, no, that's the hardest piece to wrap your head around on this. You're right. It's every farm is different. Every climate is different. Every market is different. So you really essentially, you just have to keep the 6 soil health principles in mind. Reduce your tillage, keep the soil covered, keep a living root. Livestock integration is probably the hardest one for a lot of these guys to manage, because we just don't have any fences. But then what we're talking about here is the last one's context. And that's the biggest piece, because even your management style has an effect on how you implement these practices. So you've got to keep those in mind and try to make decisions with those principles in mind. And then it's kind of almost a leap of faith. Just, you think you need that fungicide, but if you can add some biology to it or something like that, you don't. I can't say you don't need it, because there are going to be times where you might have to have a rescue treatment, but more likely than not, you don't have to. So it's a leap of faith almost.
No, I mean, I think especially compared to the more traditional methods, where there really is kind of a formula you can follow. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's just almost like an instruction manual, and in a lot of ways that's probably a lot easier to get your head around than what you're saying. What is a leap of faith, but ultimately you guys have the data to show that it works out more times than it doesn't. Am I right there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key to any farmer thinking about going down this road and implementing these practices is find the guy in your area that is doing some of it, or like find a Blake Matthews or a Lad Wallen that are deep into it, and just make them your best friend and learn from them. Farmers, it's kind of sad, but we're all pretty quiet about how we manage our farm. And it used to not be that way, and I don't know why it is nowadays. It's almost like a competitive thing. You don't want to share your information. And we need to get out of that mindset, because these farms that are doing it differently, they have some great information that you could tie into. And most of the time, those guys are more than willing to share what they've learned, and they don't want you to fail like they did when they first started. So it's just, find those mentors and really dig in deep with them.
So when you think about building trust with these farmers, that's the kind of thing that it's, when you're good at doing it like you are, you can just say, yeah, and we got to build up a good relationship. But without that, nothing happens. So how do you even begin? How do you think about building trust with farmers?
Yeah, you meet them where they're at. They're doing it in a way that they were taught. And it's, colleges, our forefathers have all taught us how to do this, and it's how to farm in the old way. This regenerative agriculture is so new that you just have to meet them where they're at and move at the pace that they're comfortable with. And you can't throw blame at anybody. We're just, even me in college with a plant science degree, everything that I learned in college, I've kind of thrown it out and had to relearn this production method. So you just have to meet everybody where they're at and be passionate about what you're doing and have compassion for them because they're trying to learn something brand new as well.
No, I think that's good advice for your particular line of work, but I think it's good advice just for life in general.
For life. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you think you've been with TNC since 2019, which I don't think 2019 is being that long ago, but it kind of was, especially when you throw the pandemic in there. It's a different world. But thinking forward another 7-8 years, where would you like things to be? I mean, if you get 7-8 years ahead, say you get just past the TNC's 2030 goals and you're looking back, what do you feel like, what will have made you feel good about your work? Like what, if you can accomplish this by 2031, what would it be? I mean, how would you feel like you've been successful in your work?
I kind of feel like if I can go to the grocery store and pick a head of lettuce based on its nutrient density, then I've done my job.
I've done a bunch of these regenerative ag podcasts. I did one with the Kavira Coalition a few years back, or like a year ago, and that's a good one if people want to learn more about the nutrient density. That was an interesting one for that particular topic. One more question about your interactions with farmers, and say there's a farmer listening to this who's not in Idaho, who may not be able to reach out to you directly, or you wouldn't be working with them directly. What is, like, if you had to recommend just one small step that farmers could try if they're interested in this, but they don't want to overhaul their entire operation? Is there just kind of a way that folks can dip their toe into this kind of work, or is it like, what would you recommend as kind of a first step?
Yeah, first step would be, if you're a full tillage guy, reduce that. I wouldn't say go full no-till right off the bat. That's kind of a recipe for disaster, maybe. But look at your operation. If you can cut 2 tillage passes out, do that. And then plant a cover crop. I think that's probably the key first step, is we've got to keep that soil alive. And when we plow it up after harvest and leave it bare for the rest of the year, our soil is going downhill. So first step is plant a cover crop and keep that living root in the soil as long as you possibly can until your next crop. And that's your stepping stone right there. Once you do that, your soil starts to wake up, and then you can go down all these other roads of even organic if you want to.
Hearing you talk about that reminds me of an episode I put out a few months back with a guy named Mark Easter, who he's a Colorado State, or he used to work at Colorado State, and he wrote a book called The Third Plate, and he talks a lot about the need for cover crops and how that helps keep carbon in the soil. And I feel like that reading that book was one of the first times that I was really able to understand what that, like, how carbon escapes from the earth. And it really just kind of allowed me to get my head around it in a way that I hadn't before. So the question for you is, are there any particular books on either regenerative farming or conservation, or really any books that you would recommend for people if they're interested in learning more about all this?
Sadly, not much of a book reader. I'm a podcast guy because I am in my car.
Give me podcast.
Yeah. John Kempf is a great podcast. I'm more of a podcaster, so any information I can get through that, I dive into that while I'm driving around the state of Idaho.
Well, I feel like podcasts are especially for super busy people and people who have a hard time sitting still, which it seems like you've got a lot going on. It's like the best thing ever, because you can do it while you're doing other stuff. You know what I mean?
I don't know if it's that I've got a lot going on or I'm severely ADHD.
Well, maybe it's both. Sometimes that's the perfect that's the perfect recipe for people that get a lot of cool stuff done.
Yeah. Yep.
What do you do for fun? Like when you're not working, what do you do for fun?
I am a mountain biker. So
oh, you really?
I go ride in the hills, and I actually coach my son's NICA mountain bike team.
How old's your son?
He's a sophomore in high school, so 15.
Can he beat you yet?
Oh, heck yeah. He kicks my butt.
So many of my buddies that have sons, there's this moment in time on the bike when the son passes them and they're like, oh, okay, that was it.
Yep. That was about 2 years ago when I started coaching his NICA team. Yep. So mountain biking in the summer and skiing in the winter. That's how I relieve stress.
That's a really good combo. So is there anything that I missed in this conversation? You know, I feel like we covered so much, but then I know that TNC is always, innovating and has all these different programs. I mean, what are anything that I missed that you'd like to highlight?
To me, if you have any farmers listening to this, lots of times agriculture people think of the Nature Conservancy as a foe, not a friend. And it's completely the opposite. We have some great programs all over the place that can help a farmer go down this road if you would like. And it's doesn't even have to be full regenerative agriculture. It can be just if you want to start no-tilling. Nature Conservancy is a great group. I've loved working for them, love working for them. So yeah, if you have any farmers on this podcast, don't hesitate. They're great, great people.
Yeah, I think that's, I've seen it time and time again. I think about here in Eastern Colorado, there's a guy that I talk about on the podcast a lot named Matt Moorhead. And, he's been out there for 25 years building these relationships. And it used to be that the folks were kind of skeptical of any kind of conservation organization. And now TNC is one of their greatest partners. And it sounds like you're doing the exact same thing out there in Idaho, which is so awesome, man. And I learned so much from this conversation, and I really appreciate you taking the time to educate me on all this stuff. And for people listening who want to learn more, there'll be links to everything that Brad mentioned. But Brad, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate it. I hope I can get out there in Idaho and hang out with you in person one of these days.
Come on out. And my wife's uncle's farm out in Cope, Colorado. So if we're ever back in Eastern Colorado, I'll reach out to you.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.